Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or it's doing good for Ray. This is Eagle Eyes on Tech Guy. I'm Eagle Falcon. Broadcasting today at a new time. Gonna try it out for a day, seeing as how... I don't know. Unfortunately, it seems like Regret the Van is not gonna be able to co-host with me in the long term. I think his work schedule changed, and he now works on Saturdays during the second shift when my show broadcasts. So I'm gonna try and find someone else and see what happens. But in any case, I'm gonna start with admittedly a story that is a bit more local to my area, but does affect the United States on a national level. And that's an update on the Foxconn story. Foxconn, one of the biggest manufacturers of computer hardware on the entire planet of Earth, makes screens, components, motherboards, casings for name a product. Just name it. They contract out for it. It is also pretty much like the stereotypical Chinese company, even though they're Taiwanese. There's all sorts of stories about employees living on campus only, suffering depression, being paid very small wages, blah, 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 blah. This is all fitting mostly the Chinese worker stereotype. And that's just how things are in China. I still have no idea how the treatment is going to exactly be in the United States for the Foxconn factory that's going to open up here in my home state of Wisconsin, more accurately, most likely, somewhere in the Racine area. But I'm not going to talk about all that. I'm going to talk about this mind-blowing move by seemingly 80% of all media to kill this deal. Now, Foxconn is notorious for wanting as much governmental help as possible for opening up their facilities. They're also well known for some deals just not working out. And for whatever reason, everyone is just trying to look at this as, is it a good deal for the state of Wisconsin? And I don't mean the people of Wisconsin. I do, in fact, mean the state of Wisconsin. I'm going to read this article here. Just the first paragraph. All right? Because this first paragraph says a lot about the hit job that's being done on this deal. This article comes from npr.org. All right? Wisconsin lawmakers are preparing to move forward on a $3 billion tax incentive package with the technology manufacturer Foxconn. Already I have to interject. It's not $3 billion. It's 2.8. I know they just rounded up, but these little details are the sort of thing that, okay, you're trying to make this sound as bad as you can. And again, it is a rounding error. But it is a rounding error that does give you a glimpse into where the article is going. The article continues, even as the comma, even as the estimate for the state legislators' non-partisan budget office revealed the state wouldn't break even on the deal until 2043. That's the opening paragraph. And there's a lot to stew over just in that one paragraph / sentence. First off, the only time articles like this call something nonpartisan is when it's actually partisan. When a department actually is nonpartisan, it is never referred to as nonpartisan. It is never the nonpartisan FBI, or the nonpartisan CIA, or the nonpartisan IRS. Anything is only referred to as nonpartisan when it is very partisan. And the budget office is definitely being partisan on this because it's talking about how a tax incentive package, which is all done in tax credits with various requirements before they receive those tax incentives, I might add. And it's talking about when the state would break even. When was the last time any government body ever did anything for profit? Because that's what this is implying. The implication here is that the only thing that matters to the government is profit. And keep in mind, the only way a government body of any nature makes money is by taxing. Government's job is not to turn a profit. Government's job is to govern. What should be looked at here is not when the tax revenue from Foxconn will pay off some tax credits. It should be looked at, what is the impact going to be? The impact is going to be 13,000 jobs. And the dawn of a major manufacturer that is not showing any signs of vanishing anytime soon. Entering an area of a state that is showing growth, but for the most part is severely underdeveloped. Racine, although being a city, it's not a very big city. I'm actually not even sure if it's called a city. It doesn't matter. You're still talking about 13,000 jobs. You're then also talking about all the additional jobs that would be drawn. Now, let's pretend for a minute. Let's pretend that 13,000 doesn't have a prayer of happening. Okay? Let's pretend they reach half of that. Let's say they reach only 6,000. $6,000 grunt workers making somewhere between, I'm going to go on the low side. The Foxconn says their average salary is going to be 60,000. Let's say the grunt no-skill labor is half that. Let's say it's 30,000. 30,000 plus benefits. That's not all that terrible for non-skilled labor. People would love to have that. And that's assuming on the low side, like super, super low. Now, let's pretend, let's go on the exact opposite. Let's say that the engineering jobs are 90,000. Those jobs are more than likely going to draw people into the area. Draw in those high wage jobs. That draw in that skill. That's going to keep people who are currently learning at a university to be an engineer. That keeps them here in the state rather than going off to Silicon Valley. Or going off to China or wherever. On top of all the other jobs it would create. Think about it for a minute. This Foxconn facility is going to start simply with making high-end LCD screens, more than likely for TVs. Probably also digital signs, certain all-in-one computers. But for those of you who think that the iPhone's going to be built in Wisconsin or in the US, that's not going to be this factory. If it is, then that's a secret Foxconn is keeping close to their chest. Because they're saying this is mostly about large LCDs, which makes sense. It would make sense to manufacture the larger LCDs that are harder to ship overseas and keep making the small components for smartphones and whatnot overseas and transport tons of them over by ship. Think about it. A TV takes up probably what? 20 times the space of a smartphone? Manufacture it here, ship it around the country on the dirt cheap via trucks. Rather than load it up on a ship, pay the ship uploads it onto the dock, pays a trucker to truck it all across the US. Makes more sense for that to go to the phones, right? That means more than likely close to Foxconn while they're making these LCDs. More than likely, as I said before, Sharp would also be built within a 100-mile radius of the Foxconn campus. And more than likely, one of the big trucking carriers, whether it be Rail, Swift, Schneider, Celadon if it still exists, JB Hunt, one of them is more than likely going to build a terminal very close to there. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure there's actually already a rail terminal close to there. If Rail gets that contract, they're going to want to expand. There's going to be more jobs there. My point is this. Foxconn is already going around and putting in and paying, I should actually say, paying various real estate companies to place bids and to place holding cash on those bids. They're asking various landowners how much this plot of land costs and then depositing cash now to say, we want to hold that price. The tax incentives have to come with various goals that have to be met. Everyone saying that there's a problem with this is not reading it. Everyone's implying that Foxconn can just say, we're going to build this, collect tax money from the state, and then run away holding a bag of cash. Anyone who actually says that either isn't paying attention or is an idiot. Or is intentionally lying. Kind of like how this legislature's nonpartisan budget office is being extremely short-sighted. Intentionally picking numbers to try and kill this deal. And I believe they're doing it for playing political games. And let me tell you something. I'm not political. I hate politics. I absolutely hate politics. And this story sums up every reason why I hate politics. Because this is a no-brainer. This deal was negotiated very well. It looks extremely good for the state. The legislatures need to stop trying to monkey with it. They need to stop trying to put forward amendments. They need to look it over, make sure they understand it, and then vote yay or nay. And unless they discover something that I haven't, which is quite possible, they should be voting yay. And all of these various outlets that want to try and say that this is the worst deal ever just because President Trump is involved with it, or the fact that it's going to make... I don't even know if that sound actually played over the air or not. But just, as I said, just because President Trump is involved with this deal, just because the governor, Scott Walker, is involved with this, put the politics aside. It is just so obnoxious that sort of nonsense has to get in the way of what looks like a slam dunk win. Alright, enough of venturing into questionably political areas. We'll do that later when we cover the Google story, which everyone knows I have to. Instead, let's talk about how the Ryzen Threadripper may in fact be the CPU that pretty much wins on content creation. So, you know how we've been kind of talking about how the Ryzen AMD chips weren't really the best for gaming, but were really, 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 really good for workstation applications? Well, it turns out when you take a chip that by its architecture is really good for workstation applications, and then you make it bigger, it pretty much wins on all grounds for workstation applications on a budget. I mean, that's pretty much all there is really to it. The processor has a disgustingly high amount of CPU cores. Unjust Rana, who came in late to the conversation, said that Foxconn won't pay off the state until 2040s under the most optimistic conditions. Utterly false. all the other statement is also false. He also says the agreement allows Foxconn to ignore environmental laws. No, they can't. The agreement... Okay, I guess I gotta dive back into the Foxconn story for a bit. Because once again, I have to go back to the point how everyone's trying to shoot down this deal without actually reading the deal. The agreement says that it can circumvent certain... I'm trying to think of the right word for this. Normally when you do these sort of construction deals for major facilities, you have to get literally a Bible full of permits. The agreement gets rid of a large number of redundant permits. However, they still have to not only follow the Wisconsin environmental laws, they also must follow the national environmental laws. They still are under the rules for the EPA. And again, to restate, 2043 until the state breaks even, the only thing they're taking into account for that is just the estimate of income tax. No other taxes or possible economic growth was taken into consideration. It's just... No, honestly, the deal is fine. It really is. The way it's set up is that it circumvents a lot for helping get Foxconn off the ground, but once they're intact, they still have to follow the everything. They still have to follow all the employment laws. They still have to follow all the environmental laws. They are more than likely probably going to have to help invest into Racine's water purification in some way, shape, or form. Just because their factory is possibly going to be the size of Racine at this rate. And it's just, again, it is absolutely hilarious how many of these articles just decided to not read the deal. What was I talking about with Threadripper before I interrupted myself? I'll just get to my point with the Threadripper. If you're looking to build a super powerful content creations rig, and you want to try and do it as cheap as possible, Threadripper, hands down, the way to go. And more, for people who are looking to do Twitch streaming or YouTube or gaming streaming in general, getting a really, really, really big Ryzen chip, or even going to the Threadripper category, is looking better and better and better. Just because it's going to run those games at an acceptable rate, in addition to handling the stress of OBS like it's nothing. And I do want you to keep in mind, for anyone trying to go into that for gaming, streaming, or whatever, never, ever underestimate the amount of stress OBS can put on a CPU. You'll be shocked how much that 10% OBS takes will cut into what your CPU can do. The Ryzen Threadripper starts at, I want to say it was the 500s. Which sounds like a lot, but it's not that bad compared to the Intel competition. Yeah, 550 is what the Threadripper starts at. And that's for an 8-core, 16-thread part. The 1920X, that's the 12-core, 24-core part, or 24-thread part at $799. And the highest end, 1000 at 16 cores, 32 threads. Again, the Threadripper is an extreme part. And the only reason I say budget is because it is a budget compared to getting the Intel equivalent of an 8-core or 12-core part. Where there you're automatically starting over 1,000. If you're looking to go cheaper than that, go with a Ryzen 7 and be happy. Be happy forever. All right, let's talk for a minute about I don't even know what you'd call this thing. So Intel went ahead and they created a new SSD form factor. The form factor they're calling the Ruler SSD. And at first glance, that's what this thing looks like. It looks like a long, thin bar with a little connector at the end. What this thing's sole purpose in life is for server use. I'm sorry, if you're hoping to have one of these in your rig, it's going to be a little tricky. Possible, but tricky. All right, here we go. Actually, here's the actual name of the form factor. I have now actually found it. The form factor is called EDSFF, or Ruler. The height of this thing is slightly shorter than a AA battery, as they show in a picture. And these things... Oh, what's the capacity? Well, the article does not say, which is kind of disappointing. The goal of this thing is to... Oh, it's 32 terabytes in one of these rulers. 32 terabytes of SSD storage space in one of these rulers. And it connects via an M2 slot in the back of the chassis. The height is intentional. The height is exactly what would be in a 1U server. That's the smallest server you can get and still have it fit in a rack. And without it being a blade. What the goal is from side to side to stack as many of these in there to eventually add to 1 petabyte of storage in a 1U server. Now, right now, they're not at it yet. I think they need to double it to, if my math's right, 64 terabytes in a 1 ruler in order to get to a petabyte. That is still a disgusting amount of storage and a disgustingly small amount of space. And you can bet that companies like Google, like Amazon, want to get their hands on this sort of stuff as soon as possible. They've probably already got their parts department already in line to get their hands on this. Especially Google. A petabyte at SSD speeds? On PCI Express speeds? You could access that data in less than a nanosecond. That'd be... God. That's crazy. I know crazy, and that's crazy. The only thing crazier is the fact that the 8th generation core processor lineup is to be revealed in 9 days. And probably less if you're actually listening to this not live. August 21st is when Intel is going to release its 8th generation core processor family. They are going to be launching this on Facebook, and of course, I guarantee you, I'll be talking about it that Saturday. This would be the Coffee Lake processors. This would be the 3rd iteration in the Lake architecture. I also want to say this is going to be the one that introduces 6 cores to the laptop side of things. But here's a rumor that has me a little concerned. The rumor is that the 8th generation, aka Coffee Lake Intel processors, will not be compatible with Z270 chipsets. And that's troubling. And yeah, Unjust Man already points out that it's going to be tick, tock, tock, tock. I don't think there's going to be a 3rd tock, but this would be the 2nd tock. For those of you who don't know, the way Intel used to, until this one, do processors, that there'd be a tick where there's a new architecture to the CPU, and then a tock with a refinement of the tick. This would be a 2nd tock with another refinement, but I don't know how much of a refinement it's going to be if it's going to be incompatible with 270 chipsets. I mean, that means that the chip's going to be such a refinement that it's no longer compatible with the old foundation. Which then makes me wonder, are the chips going to still be Kaby Lake or not Kaby Lake? Is it Kaby Lake? There's so many Lake processors now I've lost track. It was Kaby Lake. Man, I can't remember if Kaby Lake was the 1st or 2nd one. Doesn't matter. Is it still going to be the first generation, which would be the 6000 series architecture, or is it going to be something different? Or is Intel just make it incompatible with 270 chipsets to sell more chipsets? And that would be, at the very least, an angry glare and a wag of the finger. At worst, could, and I want to stress, could venture into anti-competitive practices in some manner. Unjust Man in the chat asks, is it 14 nanometer? Yes. They are. It's still going to be 14 nanometer. The previous generation, which was Kaby Lake, okay, it was Kaby Lake. That was 14 nanometer. Coffee Lake will also be 14 nanometer. Alright, this is actually now driving me nuts. What was the 6th generation code name? 6th generation Intel Core Intel code name. Skylake! Oh, that was literally killing me. Yeah, it was Skylake. That was the tick. That was the 6th generation, the first one. Then it was Kaby Lake. Now it's Coffee Lake. I can't believe I blanked on Skylake. Oh, that was literally killing me. Anyway, let's move on and talk about a wireless mouse that Logitech made that already existed. I mean, this didn't technically already exist, but something like it definitely did. What this is it's a wireless mouse, but it comes with a trackpad. The trackpad wirelessly charges the mouse. I keep saying trackpad. I mean mouse pad. It comes with a mouse pad that hooks up to the computer. The mouse pad serves as the wireless receiver, in addition to being a wireless charger. While the mouse is on the mouse pad, it wirelessly charges the mouse. Then you can technically, if you wanted to, take the mouse off the pad and use it elsewhere, and it would consume its battery life, but you can put it back on. I've actually seen something like this back at the computer shop I used to work at. The place was called Computer Exchange, and there was this crazy, unbranded, clearly made from the smallest Chinese company that was shipped overseas on a smuggling boat sort of affair. You've seen those kind of things. Those really cool gadgets that look like they're really cheaply made, and you're like, wow, why hasn't someone else done this but better? It was one of those things. It was a mouse pad, you'd put it on something, you'd have your mouse, but it would only work on the mouse pad. Because the pad itself was basically a trackpad that was tracking the mouse. So, while I have seen this in effect, I'm glad to see that this exists again 10 years after I've seen it the first time. Alright, let's talk about the other political bit of tech news. I really kinda don't want to talk about this, but I kinda have to. I'm willing to bet this is kind of how a news reporter feels if, like, a terrible murder happened in their neighborhood and they knew they had to go in the next morning and talk about it. Actually, that'd probably be worse. I mean, they wouldn't want to talk about it because it's someone they like. This I don't want to talk about because it's just, no matter what I say, I'm gonna get hate mail. Send your hate mail via Twitter at RealDonald. No, let's not do that. All right, so let's talk about what happened A Google engineer was fired after they released a memo claiming that Google's internals work like an ideological echo chamber, wanting to push for diversity when in fact these pushes are just filling quotas rather than actually hiring on the best employees. This is actually very close to, as actually Unjust Banana just kind of idly commented, how a lot of SJWs think that you have to fill a gender gap or you have to fill a racial quota, because if you don't, you're a terrible person. And it doesn't matter whether you have like the best engineer in the world, whoever you pick next has to be a woman, despite if they're underqualified or not. It's that sort of mentality. The thing that's really noteworthy about this is that after the guy went and talked about this problem, he was fired. All right, here we go. I know you're already typing up your hate mail, punching away at the comments. Fortunately, I did this early in the morning, so I don't have much of a chat listening live right now. It's almost like I planned it that way. Shh. Don't tell them that. The most noteworthy part about this story is the fact that Google fired the guy. I, for one, hate SJWs. I hate the social justice warriors. I really do. Primarily because of their methods. They do everything in their power to silence any sort of argument against their beliefs. They are, in fact, by definition, fascists. And on this same sort of thing, that's exactly what happened to this engineer. He was silenced. Which directly contradicts Google's entire premise of don't be evil. Remember that? Long ago? How Google's whole foundation was, we want to not be evil. We don't want to be, quote-unquote, Skynet. We want to listen to our employees and listen to their concerns. This employee had a thought that went, now, wait a minute. We're trying to do X and Y to try and be better people, but it might prevent us from getting the best we can. He wasn't answered to with a counterpoint. He was answered with being fired. And yeah, I'm going to side with the engineer on this. And I'll side with anyone in Google that follows what the engineer has to say. Now, if there's another employee within Google that's like, oh, I agree with the guy and then murders a bunch of people, no, I'm not going to side with that guy. No, that guy's weird. That guy's creepy. And that guy should be in jail. But the whole thing of just saying, look, we got a guy who is a really qualified engineer and we have a female engineering student, we're going to go hire the female so that we're not sexist, that's a problem. Because you're not getting the best candidate. If it's flipped around, that it's the male who is the engineering student, fresh graduate, and the woman is a veteran with a lot of experience, absolutely, take the woman. Take the best employee for the job. Doesn't matter whether they're male, female, transgender, a trigendered pyrofox, black, white, gray, purple, green, whatever. Who cares? And of course, because I preach this, as Unjust Banana just commented it in the chat, they're going to say, oh, you have to check your privilege, Eagle, because you're a white male. Blah, blah, blah. Shut up. That's not an argument. That's you being an ass. That's what it boils down to. I want to hear the better argument for if I'm looking for a well-qualified engineer, why I should take a female engineering student rather than a male experienced engineer. Because I'll take the experienced one every day of the week, whether male, female, elephant, or whatever. And even if it was in, let's even take it to my own field of truck driving. Again, I don't care if somehow, and granted this would be a really weird way for it to come down, but if somehow my choices came down between a man and a woman who have been in multiple accidents and a dog who has driven semis perfectly fine, I'm going to hire the dog. I'm going to hire whoever the best candidate is. Regardless of what they are. I actually do love Unjust Banana's comment in the chat. His comment for the SJWs is, yes, I work in a call center because of my privilege. Yeah, I should use it more often. Yeah, I drive a van because of my privilege, clearly. I stare at a wall and talk into a microphone because of my privilege. No, I don't get paid for that. This is clearly a hobby. I think that pretty much summarizes this whole Google thing, doesn't it? And I guarantee you, this one is not over. This is going to get more and more and more and more interesting as things unfold. And really, the thing I'm most disappointed in is the fact that this literally would make Google the world's biggest social justice warrior. And that in itself is kinda terrifying. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. Ooh. You need to talk about something funnier. Like the fact that Acer's building a VR headset. I mean, let that sink in for a minute. I mean, let's be fair for a minute. I am glad that Acer is doing this. Unjust Man says in the chat, not just Google, San Fran tech companies and such. The thing is that a lot of the other tech companies and such are very subtle about it. Although you always do suspect companies like Apple and whatnot kind of have those sort of hiring practices. This is the first time one of them has actively fired someone and silenced them. Because they're like, now wait a minute, maybe we should hire the best candidate and not one based on sex or race. And then was fired. And that's the part that worries me. But again, we're more than likely going to talk about that on another podcast. And in my head, I'm going to be dragged kicking and streaming by myself to go talk about it. But in any case, Acer made a $300 headset. And I want to clarify this. This is a $300 VR headset that would fit into the Oculus Rift or HTC Vive category. This is not stick your cell phone into a hunk of cardboard and stare at the world. This is one that would hook up to a computer, so you'd actually have good graphics and have a good experience as such. I mean, let's be honest. The whole accelerometer in the phone using its, it's not great. It's basically the equivalent of using one of those, Viewfinder? God, I can't remember what they're called. I think it's Viewfinder. Those little binocular things that pretty much almost all of us had as a kid. You put in the little film disc. And it gives kind of a 3D effect of an image. That's basically what the cell phone in a cardboard box strapped to your head is. It's basically a more modern equivalent of that. The Acer one falls into the Vive category. Where I can hook this up, I can go play a game, I can go experience a VR experience that is high def, that is at good frame rates, and is a lot less likely to make me sick looking at it. Now, that does mean your cost of entry is still high. But it's now $200 less than an HTC Vive and $400 less than an Oculus Rift. Assuming those prices haven't adjusted all that much. I mean, that's still right? The Vive is still $500, the Oculus Rift is still $600? Am I remembering that wrong? I don't care. You still gotta pair it with a decent rig, though. One that usually is gonna cost upward of, about $1,000. Maybe a little less. I'd say for the most part, you're looking at a Ryzen 7 with either a GTX 970 or an RX 480. The article says that you should have an RX 480 or a GTX 980. You can get away with a 970. 970 is basically the same thing as a 480 or a 580. Oh, wait a minute, no. I'm a generation behind. No, either the RX 580 or the GTX 1070. I don't know why this article's talking a generation behind. Yeah, well, the point is still, you're not gonna be doing it anytime soon still. The content isn't really all that expansive. There's about a handful of games. Right now on the internet, there's a huge meme challenge going around on some of the object editors on trying to catch a clip into a gun. There's actually quite a few hilarious videos of, like, a guy holding the gun upside down and just trying to, like, create a clip and just drop it in. And you just see under the gun is just a mountain of, like, all the clips that missed. It still boils down to VR is still a toy. It really is. And I know me and some other streamers have said that the Sony VR is a toy. That is also a toy. It's even more of a toy than actual VR. It's still going to be a while before VR actually becomes a good choice for content creation. The only time it is right now is really just to show off what early VR can do. And it's pretty much going to fill that kind of early catalog. That's going to do it for me today. I thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, there was no podcast last week because there was a recording error. Yeah. The whole thing was lost and I was too lazy to recover it because, honestly, not my best work. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next week. We'll be recording live 12 o'clock Central Time every Saturday. Take care. See you then.